looking at O'Reilly's criticisms of D.A. Waite's view on that the King James Bible is not perfect. Now, Waite talked about the editions of the King James Bible being different, and therefore you can't say the King James Bible is perfect. O'Reilly is not quite correct in the way he approaches the issue. O'Reilly tries to say, well, the different editions of the King James Bible, regardless of the variations of presentation between them, are correct, and he tries to justify it not on the argument, which would be a correct argument, to say that the text and translation of King James Bible is correct. He tries to argue on the basis that, you can justify both the different presentations. So where one presentation might say in 1611 there was a new building round about, and yet the present edition says there was a row of building round about, he tries to justify both presentations. That's a wrong view. The right view is to say that the correct text and translation was there in 1611, printers made mistakes, the spelling was not standardized, and there was editorial issues in 1611 as compared to what happened in time when editors worked on the King James Bible. They worked on the editions, and ultimately we have in time been given a correct presentation, so that the sense or the meaning or the intended rendering, what should have been there in 1611, is not so clear as what is here now, what we have, so we can see exactly perfectly. And obviously, the issue of printers' errors would somehow have an effect on, if you were to take the 1611 edition literally, you might not be led astray seriously, but you would not be getting the exact precise meaning of what was intended at the time and understood by editors. And you can see clearly that the editors did know about things because they did change them. Well, they changed them because they knew, hang on, this wording here is not correct. Maybe it was a printer's mistake, or maybe it was not aligning to the correct use of standard English or whatever, which for whatever reason it needed to have that purifying work to make sure that it was presented in such a way that it would be exactly clear the communication of the concepts. So we cannot rely on the jots and tittles of the 1611 edition and say, well, this is correct, and then do as O'Reilly does, and then try, because first of all, we know the 1611 edition is not correct in its jots and tittles in every place. Then you can't do what O'Reilly does, and O'Reilly tries to justify the meaning in 1611 and the meaning today and say they're both somehow correct. It's not a correct way of thinking. It's not a clear way of thinking. When you look at, in the New Testament, he says, is this the son of David? That's a quote from 1611. And today we have, is not this the son of David? The way that they used grammar in 1611 does not so clearly give how we understand it today. And it's our 1769 type of reading, is not this the son of David, that has it correct. We have the pure Cambridge edition, and the pure Cambridge edition is 100% correct in its presentation. Is not this the son of David was what it was meaning in 1611, but for whatever reason it was not correct in 1611 as far as its presentation. The text and translation were correct in 1611. Now, O'Reilly does this extraordinary thing. He goes to Berry's Textus Receptus to try and justify or explain the 1611 rendering or presentation. He tries to justify it and say, well, that's like it is a legitimate way of saying it. Well, it's not. It's not legitimate in that it is unstandardized English, it's prone to printer's errors, and it is not exactly correctly to the jot and tittle correct in 1611. So you can't say, well, a printer's mistake in 1611 is somehow giving the truth, because a printer's mistake is not giving the truth. You have to rely on, ultimately, the presentation that has been purified. And that's exactly the case with our pure Cambridge edition. And you can see this very clearly when O'Reilly, he goes to a verse, 1 Corinthians 12 verse 28, and it says helps in governments in 1611. Well, it says helps, governments today. Now, what does he do? Instead of saying, well, the editors obviously understood that that was a printer's mistake or it was an unstandardized presentation of English in 1611, and the editors have worked, and from the earliest years the editors changed, and we have a correct presentation since that time, and we have a correct presentation today. O'Reilly doesn't even use that argument, which is a correct argument. O'Reilly doesn't say that at all. He goes, a literal rendering of Berry's TR appears to support the current reading, so the change could be typographical. Hang on. If you're going to Berry's TR to try and justify why it's correct today, you're doing the same thing D.A. Waite does. You're putting Berry's TR as an authority greater than looking at the English. That's a major problem. The other major problem is you can use Berry's TR to change anything today, or say, oh, this was a mistake in 1611 that's never been corrected, and change it today. What's going to stop that? If you have Berry's TR, it becomes subjective. It becomes, well, the Greek is now the authority we look at. It's a wrong approach. And it's an approach, I think, that goes against a proper King James Bible-only position. And it's also illogical to say anyway that a printer's mistake and a correct presentation are both concurrently correct, or both giving the meaning. It's a wrong approach to say that, because... O'Reilly does say it. He says, however, both editions show that governments was a separate gift. Well, 1611 printer's mistakes or unstandardized spelling and grammar is not giving the exact concepts exactly correctly if you were to follow the literal jots and tittles of 1611. You may be thinking, well, there's helps in governments, because that's what it says. But in reality, and people knew it already then, and editors changed it quickly, in time we don't have any editions that have helps in governments, but we have helps, governments, is all because people understood that was the exact presentation that was correct and is correct. And to try and say, as O'Reilly does, quote, most significantly, the variation does not involve error in either edition, is way off the track. Ludicrous argument, because a printer's error alone would be an error, but it is a mistake, because to have one concept is different to have another. To have one word different, to have a comma different, is going to be some kind of difference. You can't justify two different presentations as both correct. One ultimately is exactly what was intended, and what obviously God has outworked to have for us through our receiving from the proper editorial work that has occurred from 1611, through 1638, 1769 into our pure Cambridge edition today. Another example is 1 John chapter 5 verse 12. He says the contemporary edition adds of God to the second reading of the Son. He's mistaking, actually, in the words he's using here, he's mistaking that readings, if you take the word reading to mean what is presented in Greek, then that's one issue. If you take what is given in a edition, the reading of an edition, that's another thing. So you can't make a mistake with those two different concepts. So the reading in English, or we more precisely would say the presentation of English in 1611, did not have the words of God at that verse, but now we have of God. To call it an addition is dubious, because if it was the concept and intended that it was of God in 1611, let's say the printers omitted accidentally the words of God, then you can't say it's an addition. And yet he says that. He says the contemporary edition adds of God to the second reading of the Son. Obviously, this does not alter the meaning of the verse in any way. Yes, of course it alters the meaning of the verse. Of God is a clear difference. I mean, come on. If you were to say, well, this word is not present in this 1611 edition, and yet it's present today, then the 1611 edition... people could argue this. It's an incorrect argument. They could say, well, the 1611 edition is demoting the Son of God and just saying he's the Son and not of God. And we have to have a correct view on this. And the correct view is that somehow or other the 1611 edition was missing the words of God, but it was quickly corrected, quickly changed, so that the correct presentation was there, and which of course was what the translators actually were intending anyway. And it does alter the meaning of the verse if you were to take the 1611 alone. So you can't justify or make an argument based on, well, the 1611 and today are both correct, in that the text and translation of 1611 was correct, but the printers did make mistakes in 1611. And printers' mistakes do not equal the infallible, inerrant Word of God. Now, O'Reilly does exactly what D.A. Waite does. He goes to the Greek. Why does he have to say theou, or of God, is found in Berry's TR, and so the addition is clearly typographical? Why would he have to do, which is what Waite does, go to the Greek and talk about a Greek edition of the Textus Receptus, whatever one, and then talk about, well, now the King James Bible is correct here because of this, or to try and justify why we should have the Son of God today based on Greek, when, whilst that is a possible argument to make, is not the ultimate argument, because the ultimate argument is we don't have to go to the Greek to know why we have it correct today. We have an English Bible which we have received from tradition. We have a correct presentation which has been received through the church, and it clearly says the Son of God. It's in our pure Cambridge edition, and going to the Greek is only a secondary thing to say, well, obviously in Greek it does have that, so, it's correct. Because it's very dangerous, actually, to go to the Greek in regards to saying, well, if it said that in 1611, then maybe that was a printer's mistake, and so you could start to change the current edition today on the same argument, on the same basis, and that's a very dangerous thing. It opens up that dangerous can of worms. It opens up a dangerous crack, and opens up for floodgates to come and say, well, we don't support this particular rendering today because of this reason, because of the Greek. D.A. Waite does that. In 1 John chapter 5 and verse 8, it has the word spirit lowercase. His argument why it doesn't matter, or to try and say, well, capital S on spirit, can be accepted by him, is because he says that the Greek has no capital letter on the word there for spirit. Well, either our English Bible is reliable or it isn't, and either our correct presentation today is reliable or it isn't, and so it comes down to whether or not we have the perfect Word of God presented correctly today or not. So the issue isn't just, inspiration, is the 1611 King James Bible containing the inspired words of God, and do we have the inspired Word of God in English today? So that's not the only issue here. The issue is, do we have the correct presentation of the inspired English words of God? And that's the issue which I'm standing for and saying we do. It's in our pure Cambridge edition, and we know that we can rely on every jot and every tittle because it's been provided from God.